I'm Bob Vavra. Welcome once again to Machine Design Insights. The consortia under the Manufacturing USA banner continue to drive a lot of innovation with a mix of public, private, government, and educational assets all working together to solve some of the manufacturing issues of today and certainly prepare for manufacturing tomorrow. And we're joined today by Berardino Baratta, the new CEO of MXD. In his role, he oversees all the technology investments, partner relations, and project execution for MXD's more than $120 million portfolio of advanced manufacturing technology, cybersecurity, and workforce development, research, development, and demonstration. But Berardino's also overseeing MXD Cyber, which seeks to raise the cybersecurity profile of small and medium-sized manufacturers to strengthen America's supply chain, and also MXD Learn, which aims to help develop the manufacturing workforce of the future with new skilling, reskilling, and upskilling, cybersecurity, and advanced manufacturing curriculum programs. Berardino, thank you for joining us. This is a relationship we've had for a long time, and I've spent a lot of time in your facility in the past. First of all, congratulations on being named the new CEO of MXD.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's pretty exciting to be in this role. You know, it's an amazing team. We're doing some really good work. And the opportunity to lead this organization is really something that I'm humbled by the opportunity, but also really excited by it at the same time.
You know, you've been associated with MXD for many years. Talk about where the organization is now and how you've seen it grow and change over the last few years.
Yeah, so I joined MXD 3 years ago this month. Initially, I came in to run the tech strategy team underneath Jenna Pilot, who's our VP of Strategy and Engagement. 2 years ago, when the VP of Engineering, Projects and Engineering role opened up, I made the transition into that team, and I've been running that group up until this most recent posting. But when you think about it, it's roughly 3.5, 4 years ago that Chandra, our previous CEO, came on board, and the organization dramatically changed. We changed name, but that was just one message of it. We joked that we became more efficient. We went from 5-letter acronym to 3. But really, when you think about it, we've expanded what we do. And our mission hasn't dramatically changed. We're here to help manufacturing. So we want to strengthen their operations. We want to make them more secure. We are the Digital Institute and the Cybersecurity Institute. So really, that's where you're going to see our focus. But the amount of impact into manufacturing has shifted. And I'll give you some numbers, right? So we were named as the National Center for Cybersecurity and Manufacturing. That happened in the last 3.5 years. We received congressional funding to implement some of those programs. You know, right now I'll leave it at that, but later hopefully we can dive into some of the cybersecurity elements. In the last 3 years, we've tripled the number of active projects to 66 today across our whole portfolio: digital, supply chain, factory floor, cybersecurity, and workforce. What's really interesting is in the first 8 years of the Institute, we completed 74 projects. So today we have almost as many active projects as we completed in 8 years. So I expect that that'll continue to drive. And these projects are across that whole portfolio of activities. It's all there to try to help strengthen manufacturing. We've started doing some work in the last 2 years with the Department of Defense at their facilities to help them modernize. So we're working with Rock Island Arsenal here in Illinois. We're helping them lead some of their modernization efforts to really start bringing advanced manufacturing to their floor. If you ever get a chance to visit this facility, it's an amazing facility with over 100 years of history. They have some things that you could think are out of World War II, Korea timeframe. Some of those elements, though, are cutting edge, and we're trying to make sure that we bring forward all of their legacy equipment and legacy technology to make them the most effective. We on our factory floor, as you know, we were talking before this recording started, the factory floor changes dramatically. If you visited MXD before the pandemic and you visited today, it is 70% different, 80% almost. Almost every element of that floor has changed. One example of that is AT&T and Betacom as members. We have a fully functional 5G network here, not just one, but 2. So we actually can cover all of the 5G technologies that manufacturers are looking to use. And working with the government and industry, we have funding to go build out a series of test beds that will start looking at the use cases that both industry and the DoD need, and so that we can start testing 5G use cases here in our factory environment. But before we end, I got to talk about workforce. Right? Probably the most important thing that we do, because this is really making sure that not only do we have the factories of tomorrow with the technologies of tomorrow, but also the people to run them and to produce the parts that we want. So working with industry and academia, we launched just before I joined a digital taxonomy that looked at the roles of the future for digital engineering, digital manufacturing. In 2020, we issued a cybersecurity for manufacturing hiring guide that identified over 180 roles that how cybersecurity affects manufacturing. In total, we have over 427 roles identified, and we've built out success profiles and career pathways. Success profile, what does someone look like early, mid, and late stage in their career? The profile, or the pathway, excuse me, is the way to get there. How do you take someone that's never considered a manufacturing role and find them an entry-level career in this space? To me, this is the most interesting thing we do because it's impacting human lives, right? If we can create an opportunity for someone to have a career in manufacturing that they didn't have access to before, these are fulfilling careers that can really help take care of people and change their lives. You know, there's predicted to be 3 million shortfall in jobs by the end of the decade. We really want to do our part to help fill those gaps. So it's just a glimpse into stuff we've been doing. But if you think as an institute, we're fulfilling our mission. But the fact that we're the second oldest mission is allowing us to have some meat underneath that we can build on. And that's how you'll see it with all these different activities that were maybe the seeds were planted 3-4 years ago, but now we're really starting to reap the benefit of it.
Absolutely. And it's, you know, and it's evolved also from the very beginning. This was an initiative that was started as manufacturing looked and said, we need to get a much stronger public-private government cooperation on this front. But it's really evolved. It's not solely government funded anymore. Your partners are very heavily involved in this, both from the supply side and from the academic side. Can you talk about how that process has evolved?
Yeah, and as you mentioned, public-private partnership, right? This is not about just government funding, work in the industry. It's really about a co-investment. So we're a partner organization. We have 300 plus members today. Like manufacturing, a small handful are the big manufacturers, the Lockheed, the Boeing, the Dow. A lot of solution providers at the top as well, Siemens, Microsoft, AT&T, and others. But the bulk of our members are small manufacturers. They're startups and small solution providers. There are 40 plus academic institutions. We really try to bring together the best of everyone's abilities to try to target those problems that are too big for any one manufacturer. So as much as I would love to go to Boeing and fix Boeing's problems and make Boeing make a better airplane, I'd rather figure out what are the problems that affect Boeing and Dow and Betacom for their partnership programs. Now we're looking at a supply chain problem, for example, and we then target technology from the government side and money from the government side into those problems, but we match it to the private investment of both capital and people so that together they're trying to solve these problems. As a membership consortium, everybody benefits. So we make sure that everyone within the consortium gets something out of a project. And I'll give a couple of examples, right? We'll work through and do a project related to supply chain resiliency. So we had a first generation project that was with Dow and Microsoft and Purdue University. They built together showing how you can use artificial intelligence to identify risks within the supply chain. When we had the opportunity with CARES Act funding to build on that, we expanded that program out and started looking at a much broader form of risk, but also much broader tools in place to try to mitigate that risk. So it's all about not just building a project and saying, here's some technology, we're done. It's about that interactive discussion with the members. How do you start taking the solution out of one project, understanding the impact, move to the next one? But it doesn't just end at projects. We talk about projects a lot because it throws up the good numbers, 140 projects to date, 150 million total investment. These are big numbers, but things like workshops and seminars, we put on a lot of these things. When we went to the pandemic, we shifted everything to virtual. So now we call them all webinars, but it's the same thing. How do you bring together experts? How do you bring together the people that are trying to solve these problems to enable a conversation? And so we did a 5G workshop in 2019 that really started looking at the art of the possible for 5G. In 2021, we followed up with a workshop that started making it more grounded in reality. We're now in discussions about, okay, I think it's time to have a workshop where people share their real examples of how they've implemented it. The people that are implementing, they get some value out of sharing it, but what's really interesting is who are that next tier of manufacturers that can take that outcome and really start benefiting into it. And there's tons of them in there. We did ones for Future Factory that looked at what the future of manufacturing would look like. Out of that, we found out that data was the key piece. So we had a follow-on session that really started looking at how do you generate the data within a factory and then share it both within your operations, but among the supply chain. So really all these elements are pieces that come together. The last piece I want to hit is the Future Factory, our space here in Chicago, 22,000 square foot space, right? Where MXD and our members, we put into practice Industry 4.0 and cybersecurity. So it's not just a PowerPoint, it's not just a concept. You can come in and see these things, right hands-on. Some of them you can actually literally hands-on and go touch them and play with them. Our assembly test bed is a fan favorite because they get to actually play with the tech up front. But each of those 10,000 visitors that come through our doors, initially in person, now it's a combination of virtual and in person, they get to see what that is. High school student will come through and understand, what does manufacturing look like? It's not what they see in the movies. It's here's the reality of how advanced the technology is in that space. You can have a CEO that comes through and they start realizing, oh, that $100 million request or that $1 million request for equipment, that's what they need. So it's not a concept, it's actually they can see it and touch it. But the piece that's also important is you get a small business owner who not only sees the benefit of digital, but they can also learn the effects of cybersecurity attacks and that they are at risk. So now they can start taking, mitigations to deal with that risk and close that risk within their operations. So highly encourage people to come to our facility. This is just the tip of the iceberg on the offerings that we can provide, but it's really about that partnership between government, industry, academia, all working together. And we're the facilitator that makes that happen.
And your neighborhood is starting to attract more and more like-minded companies into that neighborhood. I know one of your partners is Fast Radius. They've also set up shop not too far away. Yeah,
Fast Radius is a great example. They started here. There is some urban legend that they never paid rent. They just kind of showed up. I don't know, can't prove or deny that fact. But what's amazing is we've watched them grow from a small startup into a public entity now. They've IPO'd. And yeah, as you noticed, they built a facility. And over that period of time, they were smart about leveraging MXD. They had rented space here when they needed extra space. They used our technology. They used the ecosystem to build the partnerships. It's really on the membership side. I always tell people, the more you invest into the membership, the more you'll reap as a reward. And that applies to a small business just as much as it does to a large one.
And Fast Radius is a good example of something else that we really talk about. Is this, you mentioned the Dows and Boeings of the world, but they've got staff built in who research these things and can do the kind of on-site R&D for their own company on some of these issues. But these are very scalable solutions, and small to mid-sized manufacturers can and should be taking advantage of some of this R&D. So talk about how they can get access, first of all, and then also take better advantage of the work that you're doing.
So you hit a nail on the head, is that most manufacturers are small and they can take advantage of this technology. A lot of times we have to get them to realize that it is something that they can achieve, right? Because they think, I'm too small, I can't afford to do this. The piece that's really interesting is small manufacturers, they can't afford to do risky investments. They want to know, if I spend $1, when am I going to see my dollar back and what's the benefit my operation is going to receive from it? So we do things where every project has to have a piece of outcome, some tangible value that's provided to all members, no matter what size. For a lot of them, it's playbooks, it's outcomes where they can actually understand, okay, here's what it took to build this technology. Here's the benefit that we saw. Here's the problems that we faced. So they can go into these efforts eyes wide open. But it gets even more. We actually launched a project call that specifically built a tool to help small businesses look at the ROI behind digital adoption. So now you have a tool that's just in the process of completing that every member will have access to, that they can go in there, they can look at some categories of digital technology. It'll explain the benefits they receive from it. It'll explain how you have to actually implement it, and then tell you, here's what the ROI looks like. And it's based on actually working with SMMs, not just a theoretical that, oh, Boeing did it, and here's what we think it'll be for you. But out of that is also playbooks. Next step that comes out of it is some manufacturers, you give them that information on the ROI, they're ready to go. You have everything they need, they can just take off. Some need more information. And so in those cases, we have things around like, how do you implement a technology piece? One of them, let's shift to cyber for a second. One of the pieces that's interesting is, excuse me, MXD is a small business, and we are a National Center for Cybersecurity and Manufacturing. We need to make sure that we're cyber secure. So we took our experience targeting the DoD's CMMC requirements, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is the new standard that's coming out from DoD. We took our experience, we documented it in a playbook, we made it available to members. What it does is all of the learning curve that we went through, ups and downs, where we could have done things more efficiently when after you do it, you learn the better way to do it. We share that with everyone, and so that they have access to this to make it successful. What came out of that also was manufacturers told us they're having a hard time looking at cybersecurity. 75% of manufacturers have less than 20 employees. So I've shared that 98.5% are small and medium sized. 75% have less than 20. When you think about it, they don't have an IT department, most likely. They don't have a CISO. They don't have that expertise. So we build custom tools in this space, including the marketplace, which is really trying to help you assess your cybersecurity posture in a really easy to understand way. Instead of looking at the NIST guidelines and trying to decipher what it means, it asks you, do you have an inventory of all your equipment? Do you have email, controlled from a central location, or does everyone control their own unique? It's just simple questions. Well, there's an engine in there that takes those simple questions and maps it to the NIST guideline. And then at the end, it gives you a recommendation on, look, here's the 3 most important things you need to do for cybersecurity. Small businesses, that already for some of them is enough. But what's interesting out of it is that if you Google cybersecurity tools, you're going to get over 300 million hits. If you Google cybersecurity tools for manufacturing, it's a very manageable 35 million hits. So a small business, they can't start there. They don't know what to do. So we actually have curated a list of vendors. We're not Amazon. We're not trying to sell you solutions, but our members have said, hey, give us some guidelines on who to work with. So we've curated a set of about 60 vendors right now, and it's growing every day, that are like, okay, I need multi-factor authentication. Here's 3 of them that we've pre-vetted for you. And so it helps ultimately people to move forward and avoid those roadblocks that are in their way. The last piece is I'd love for everyone to come to Chicago. I think we have an amazing facility. The factory floor is amazing. We need to go visit people where they're at, especially with these small businesses. So we actually have teams of our marketing and support organization that get on the road and go visit these members where they work. Simple way from a cybersecurity is we do what's called the roadshow. We walk in there, we understand in partnership with, for example, the NIST MEPs or a local nonprofit. We find where those members are, we go to them, we talk to them, we share information with them directly. That opportunity of kind of taking MXD on the road is a huge value, because you'll reach people that you normally wouldn't reach before. But ultimately, we're just trying to find ways to get in front of these small businesses and get them the information they need, whether it's digital or cybersecurity. The more we share information, the more they're aware of what's out there for them to use and to make available, the faster they'll adopt this technology, and that benefits the entire supply chain.
Absolutely. And one other thing to note on cybersecurity, because I think you covered it very, very well, is that very often we're not talking about direct deliberate attacks from the outside. We're talking about weaknesses within the system internally, and with the proliferation of handheld devices and personal cellular devices, there's a lot of threats that go on in a manufacturing facility that aren't deliberate, but they're no less debilitating.
Yep. What's scary is 95% of cybersecurity breaches are caused by human error. So I always say that your people are your biggest risk, but also your biggest asset. At MXD, we, again, as a small business, we want to make sure that we're secure. As a national center, we want to be doubly secure. I probably just jinxed myself by saying that, but we train our workforce. We do training, quarterly. There's a program that's followed. But here's an interesting thing: we attack our own team. So we actually do phishing attacks against our own employees, so that if they fail, I would rather they fail one of our simulated attacks and they can learn from the experience so that they don't do it in the real world. That is so much easier and a better approach. But think about most manufacturers, they don't think about that. They don't think about the fact, like you say, they come in with their phone and they plug into a piece of equipment on the floor because they're just looking to charge their phone. If their phone is compromised, they've now piggybacked in. And it used to be that air gapping was the way to secure your operations, right? Those days are over, because Industry 4.0, digital manufacturing, lives about data. It's sharing data within your operations. It's sharing data among your supply chain. You can't gap everything and expect that it's going to solve the issue. And so again, it's an awareness campaign. How do you get people to understand where the risks are? How do you get people to look into this? Manufacturing is now the #1 target for cybersecurity attacks. It's past insurance, it's past finance. Most people aren't aware of that. I try to include that in every discussion I make, because that is a critical piece. But here's another critical piece: small businesses are just as likely to be attacked as large businesses. That's another piece. I have manufacturers that come in here and they were shocked that they were attacked, because they said, why would anybody come after me? Well, to the point you raised, nobody goes after the big manufacturers because they know that they're secure. They go after their weak links. They'll go after people by trying to piggyback into them or through the supply chain. And really what we're trying to do is make sure that we have the programs in place to raise the awareness of these small manufacturers, give them the tools that they need to secure their operations, and help them understand how to upscale their workforce to meet that need.
This segues really nicely into discussion I want to have about digital manufacturing, because you talked about cyber being a component of that, but so many other components to it. We have these concept terms: edge computing, digital twins, simulation, AI. We write about this a lot, but where are we actually at from your view in terms of the digital manufacturing journey, and what's keeping us from moving further along?
So this is probably the answer you don't like, because the answer is really good shape, really bad shape. It's like the answer is it depends, right? So one thing though that's interesting is a lot of times pre the pandemic, we would get, well, advanced manufacturing like 3D printing, that's for the lab for prototyping. And we would love to share data between, enterprise operations, the IT network, and our factory network or the OT network. But, that's not something we can do right now. The pandemic forced a lot of innovation. So all of a sudden, the 3D printers were pulled out of the prototyping and put onto the factory floor because they couldn't get injection molding or they couldn't get tools. All of a sudden, when your workforce can't physically come into the building, you do whatever it takes to give them access so that now they can continue to do their jobs, even if they have to sit at home. We've seen these transformations. We've helped with some of them. We did a program with the FDA that really looked at the digital capability, the ability for the pharma industry to adopt digital manufacturing. And it was an eye-opening report. What was really interesting is kind of the pieces we probably would have predicted beforehand. Leadership has to buy into it. You need to invest in it. You need to create a long-term roadmap to make it successful. But also what was interesting out of it too was we did a program with Illumina, one of our members, that's looking at how do you use digital twins, not in the theoretical sense, but literally a digital twin of their production floor in a regulated industry. So it's now a case where in the past, you would never use a digital twin in a regulated industry because you have to prove that the piece of equipment is doing what the piece of equipment is going to do. Now, I'd love to tell you that the FDA has approved all this and it's good to go, but the fact that they're willing to have this conversation shows that they're moving it forward. So I always get asked, what's in the way? I think the thing that's in the way is skills, like first and foremost, right? And again, we're not talking about having more data scientists and more engineers in your facility. How do you get the people on the factory floor to understand what they need to know to make this happen? That's the first step. The other one is leadership buy-in. And leadership that makes this a priority. Again, during the pandemic, the leadership said, whatever it takes, we're going to make it happen so that we can keep producing our products. We need that type of push. But then it's exactly like what MXD does, right? We do these projects, we get the learnings that come out of it, we share it broadly so that that next tier of the manufacturers can start adopting it, and the next tier and the next tier. But we also tell people, start talking to your suppliers and see whether they're starting to engage on this technology. And in some cases, they're literally funding modernization among their suppliers because ultimately it's more beneficial for them in the end. So you got to work through these issues. You got to make things go forward. I'm an optimist. I feel like we have a lot of potential coming down the pipe. And it's really just more of this evolution of what's been successful. But I don't want to assume that it's just going to happen. So MXD and our members, we have to put in the effort to make sure that it happens.
We've seen a tremendous, as you mentioned, evolution in manufacturing faster than would have happened had it been a staged, planned, and executed process. But the investments have not just been in equipment, it's really been in training and retraining your existing staff who have been through a number of technology innovations over their careers, and also going out and trying to create that next generation of workforce. And as you said earlier, showing them how the manufacturing plant of today is very, very different from the one in the past.
Yep. And I don't know the source of this, but it was called the silver tsunami. So it's all the baby boomers that are retiring. The bulk of manufacturing today are retiring in the next 10 years, right? What's interesting is that the jobs they held, the jobs they started with for sure are dramatically changed. But even the jobs they hold today, when we start thinking about someone in middle school today that's going to fill that job in the next 10 years, we need to make sure to think about what skills do they have to have so they walk in. But it also changes how people learn. As much as, I got a lot out of my engineering degree and I learned a lot in a 4-year program, nobody really learns that way anymore. That gives you the foundation. We need to start thinking about micro learnings, micro certifications that give people the skills they need without them leaving the workforce to get them. That's going to be the key to the future so that you have that resilient, that flexible, adaptable workforce that can meet the needs of your facilities both today and in years to come.
So what's the challenge now for MXD and for manufacturing in the next 5 years? We've done a lot of the hard work during the pandemic to move the digital manufacturing along, to move the digital transformation along, how do we maintain that momentum and address some of these issues like workforce shortages and supply chain challenges?
So the first and foremost is what you said. We have created this momentum. We need to keep it going. There have been some manufacturers that say, oh, we're thankful that things are going back to normal so we can get back our programs to normal. It's like those days, I think, have changed forever, right? I don't know what normal is, but I know it's not what it was 3 years ago, right? Or 2.5 years ago. What we have to do in a way is what we've been doing before, which is really how do we get people to see the benefits of digital, to see the benefits of being a cybersecure operations, help them to understand where they are today so that they can understand what they need to do to get to where they want to be. And those are the programs that we offer on the webinars, the workshops, the events here in our facility. The projects that we're in, we continue to work with members and with the DoD, our stakeholders, to identify the problems that face manufacturing. We were always looking a few years out. Because of the way we live in that innovation valley of death, it's not looking at today's problems, it's looking at tomorrow's problems and trying to invest in those areas to prepare the industry to be ready to respond to them. So we're going to continue to do those elements. On the workforce side, I'm really excited about the virtual training center that we developed. When we started talking pre-pandemic, all of our workforce programs required someone to leave their operations, come to a facility to get trained, whether it was MXD or one of our academic partners. That model didn't work great back then, but it was kind of what everybody expected. In the middle of the pandemic, we had some funding and we used it to build a virtual training center, the MXD Learn Virtual Training Center. Now it offers self-paced learning. So when you start talking about those micro learnings and those micro certifications, you don't even have to leave your house. You can do this at night. You can do it during your office hours. You can come and get micro learnings to move your skills forward so that you can upskill your own skills, give you a better opportunity for a career. But from a manufacturer, you can upskill your team so that you're better prepared to adopt these digital solutions. So I hate to say it this way, but it really is continue to do what we're doing and make sure that we're there to support the needs of our members and of industry as a whole, both today, but also work with them to understand where the industry is going so that we could be a little bit ahead of them and try to make sure that we're putting the government money that we are given to the best use to make them more successful in the long run.
I want to thank Berardino Baratta for his insights today. He's the CEO of MXD. If you're looking for more information on this consortium, it's mxdusa.org. If you're in Chicago for some of the trade shows coming up this fall, either IMTS or PEC Expo, MXD is a great place to stop. It's a nice little trip outside of downtown, and it's a great area, and you're going to be amazed by the internal facility. So my thanks once again. I'm Bob Vavra with Machine Design Insights. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe out there.